The heavy iron key felt cold and jagged against my palm. A physical tether to a mother I'd buried only 3 weeks ago. I had flown back to this sleepy Oregon suburb expecting the smell of stale lavender and the quiet dust of my childhood. But as my Uber rounded the corner of Maple Drive, my heart didn't just drop, it shattered. Why on earth was there a massive, sold sign hammered into the front lawn of a house that belonged to me? My breath hitched in my throat. A sharp, ragged sound that caught on the damp morning air as I stared at a professional landscaping crew tearing up my mother's prize-winning rose bushes. I didn't even wait for the car to fully stop before I was out the door. The smell of freshly cut grass and diesel fumes stinging my nostrils. Who does this? Seriously? Who has the audacity to sell a dead woman's home while her only son is still mourning across the country? I felt a low, vibrating hum of fury starting in my chest. The kind of heat that makes your fingertips itch. I marched toward the porch, my boots crunching aggressively on the gravel. But before I could reach the door, the piercing voice sliced through the air. "You've got to be kidding me." Out from the house next door stepped Margaret, the neighborhood's self-appointed queen of misery. A woman whose face was permanently etched into a scowl of pure entitlement. She was clutching a designer handbag like a shield and wearing a tracksuit that cost more than my first car. She looked at me not with sympathy, but with a terrifying, cold-eyed smugness that made the hair on my neck stand up. "You aren't supposed to be here," she barked, her voice hitting a frequency that could shatter glass. I stood there, blinking, the silence between us heavy with the sound of the landscaper's wood chipper grinding away in the background. "Margaret, what is that sign doing on my lawn?" Beth. My voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and rising bile. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just crossed her arms and let out a long, theatrical sigh that smelled faintly of expensive gin and peppermint. That house was an eyesore and a liability to our property values. She said, her tone dripping with a fake, sugary concern that made my skin crawl. "Since you were too busy to handle your affairs, I made sure it was taken care of." I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. Taken care of? What does that even mean? I stepped closer, my shadow falling over her polished shoes, and demanded to know who had authorized the sale. She laughed, a dry, hacking sound that had zero humor in it, and waved a manicured hand toward the driveway where a sleek black sedan was pulling in. "That would be Mr. Henderson, the new owner," she chirped. "And I suggest you leave before you're charged with trespassing." My jaw literally dropped. Trespassing on my own property? The sheer, unadulterated gall of this woman was a physical weight in the air. I looked at the man stepping out of the sedan, a middle-aged guy in a sharp suit who looked equally confused, and then back at Margaret. She was smirking. She actually had the nerve to smirk while standing on the ruins of my mother's garden. It was then that the first real spark of suspicion flickered in my mind. How does a neighbor sell a house? You need titles? Signatures? A notary, you need the law. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling against the screen as I dialed my family lawyer. My chest was tight, every breath feeling like I was inhaling crushed glass. "I need you at the house now," I whispered into the receiver, my eyes never leaving Margaret's triumphant face. As I waited, I watched her. She started directing the workmen again, pointing at the old oak tree my father had planted with a look of pure disdain. The sound of the chainsaw starting up was like a scream in my ears. "Stop!" I yelled, the sound tearing from my throat. "Everyone stop right now." The workmen paused, looking back and forth between me and the Karen of the cul-de-sac. Margaret marched over, her face turning a blotchy, angry red. You have no authority here. You little brat. Kiss? Her breath hot against my cheek. I have the power of attorney paperwork signed by your mother before she passed. My heart stopped. My mother was in a coma for the last month of her life. She couldn't have signed a grocery list, let alone a power of attorney. The air suddenly felt very still, the only sound being the distant bark of a dog and the rhythmic thud of my own pulse in my ears. A forgery. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach, leaving me lightheaded. She didn't just help, she stole. She forged the documents of a dying woman to line her own pockets and clean up her street. The audacity was so cinematic, so villainous, it almost felt fake. But the sold sign was very real. When Bill arrived 10 minutes later, followed closely by 2 police cruisers I'd summoned with a frantic 911 call, Margaret's demeanor shifted instantly. She went from neighborhood tyrant to confused elderly victim in a heartbeat. "Oh, officer. Thank goodness you're here," she wailed, her voice cracking with forced emotion. "This young man is being so aggressive. I was just trying to help the estate." I watched as Bill handed the officers the certified death certificate and the actual legal will that named me the sole executor and owner. The lead officer, a stern man with graying temples, looked at the papers and then at Margaret, whose fake tears dried up remarkably fast. "We're going to need to see that power of attorney you mentioned," the officer said. I watched her eyes dart toward her house, a flicker of genuine panic finally breaking through her mask of entitlement. She tried to stall, claiming the documents were with her private legal team, but the walls were closing in. The smell of fear is strange, it's metallic and sharp, and it was radiating off her in waves now. As the officers escorted her toward her front door to produce the proof, I stood by the mangled rose bushes and took a long, shaky breath. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, jagged shadows across the porch where I used to sit with my mom. Inside her house, the shouting began. We could hear it through the open windows, the sound of drawers slamming, the high-pitched frantic excuses, and then the heavy, unmistakable clink of handcuffs. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst. When they let her out, Margaret wasn't the polished queen of the suburbs anymore. Her hair was disheveled, her expensive tracksuit was wrinkled, and her face was a mask of pure, ugly rage. "This is my neighborhood," she screamed as they shoved her into the back of the patrol car. "I won't have it ruined by your rotting shacks." The neighbors had all come out onto their porches by then, watching in stunned silence as the woman who had bullied them for a decade was finally hauled away. But the twist? It wasn't just a simple forgery. Bill pulled me aside as the tow truck arrived to remove the new owner's car. It turns out Margaret hadn't just targeted me. She had been running a sophisticated real estate scam for 3 years, targeting the homes of the elderly and the deceased in 3 different counties. She had a mole in the county clerk's office, a cousin who helped her slide the forged deeds through the system. They found over $2 million in offshore accounts tied to her name. She wasn't just a nosy neighbor, she was a career predator who thought her zip code made her invincible. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. If I hadn't shown up today, if I had waited just 1 more week, the house would have been gutted, the trail gone cold, and my family's history erased for a profit margin. The new owner, Mr. Henderson, turned out to be a victim too. He'd handed over a $300,000 cash deposit that was now sitting in Margaret's frozen account. He looked at me, his face pale and sunken, and for a moment, we were just 2 people standing in the ruins of a crime scene. "I'm so sorry," he muttered, looking at the chopped-down roses. "I didn't know." I nodded, unable to find the words. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of grief anymore. It was the silence of a storm that had finally passed. 6 months later, I sat on that same porch, the wood freshly painted and the rose bushes starting to show new, stubborn green shoots. The trial had been swift and brutal. Margaret's power of attorney was proven to be a clumsy forgery, and her cousin had folded like a house of cards, testifying against her to save himself. Because of the scale of the fraud and the exploitation of the deceased, the judge didn't hold back. 15 years in a federal penitentiary. No parole. No country club prison. Just a gray cell for a woman who thought she owned the world. As I sat there, sipping a coffee and listening to the birds return to the oak tree she had tried to kill, I realized that justice isn't just about the punishment. It's about the reclamation. The neighborhood feels different now. People actually talk to each other. We have potlucks. There's no one patrolling the sidewalks with a clipboard and a scowl. I looked over at Margaret's house, now seized by the state and sitting empty, and felt a profound sense of peace. You can't build a kingdom on the bones of other people's memories and expect it to stand. The truth has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how much dirt you try to bury it under. My mother's house was never just an eyesore or a liability. It was a home, filled with the echoes of laughter and the scent of lavender. And now, it was finally safe. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold, I knew one thing for certain: the bullies of the world might take your roses, but they can never take your roots. Justice had been served, not just for me, but for every person she thought was too small to fight back. And standing there, in the quiet strength of my inheritance, I knew I had finally come home.